Hey there, Reverend Sully, Eric O'Sullivan ordained on the internet. The caveat, as always, please do not burn your hands holding on to my hot takes. If you do, well, that's on you, gal, or pal, or whatever friend you are residing in the great spectrum of humanity, and however you want to identify yourself and proclaim your humanity to the cosmos. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We're on the internet. Getting used to my new coffee mug. It's huge. I have, if you have been tuned into my humble YouTube station, of which I hope to earn your subscription one day, you'll know that I'm doing a daily series, I'm attempting to talk about comic books every day for the rest of the year. And I do that with the help of this coffee table book I was gifted almost 2 decades ago. So for the better part of 2 decades, this coffee table book has been on my coffee table. I've gone through it countless times, and I love the history involved in this, and the history of publication as well. Publication in between 1930 and 1955 was basically what we would consider both the internet and our streaming services today, culturally, and how we receive our information and our entertainment. So print publication medium was, for me, historically, is astounding. I love magazines. I grew up in the analog age, before the internet. We had books, we had magazines, and comic books are just one type of magazine. But magazines quite often are portals to the past. For me personally, I get the biggest sense of deja vu, or nostalgia rather, when I see advertisements in old comic books. One good thing about doing this book here every day about the golden age of DC comic books is it's a window into the past, into a culture that just got out of one world war and a depression, and it was about to go into another world war. It was a time with aspiration and also of encroaching technology and urbanization as well. Yet this is just a really nice thing, and I'm getting to the point. Yes, one of the heroes not included precedes them all, and it's because they're not a DC comic. Therefore, they're not going to give any, or let's see, we'll get there, any literal nods to timely comics. Captain America, Namor, Bucky, the original Human Torch, and Toro. They're not going to get any coverage in this book, and neither is the Shadow. Okay, the Shadow. Let's see. I got all this information pulled up. I'm trying to be a more organized kind of YouTuber. Okay, The Shadow premiered in 1931, and wasn't really a comic book character. The Shadow debuted on July 31st, 1930, as the mysterious narrator of the radio program Detective Story Hour. That was developed to boost the sales of the publishing company, the big company. There was a big publishing company then, Street and Smith, their monthly pulp, Detective Story magazine. From there, the Shadow developed, and by the mid-30s, there was a radio play, and a building mythology, and this hero that had an alias for his alias. So the Shadow's not really who he says he is. He's actually another person behind that. But also, the Shadow was a detective and had the fashion of the time. A big hat, this red scarf to disguise his face, and a lot of secret identity. He used two guns. He had a chauffeur. He one of his secret identity for his secret identity was that he was pretending to be Lamont Cranston, a millionaire playboy philanthropist, while the real Mr. Cranston was, vacationing in Europe. And but Street and Smith published some Shadow comics as well between March 1940 and September of 1949. They published 101 issues of the Shadow. But beforehand, the Shadow had radio plays and stories in novel form, in serialized novel form, and then it became a comic. But it wasn't a DC comic. Street and Smith was a huge publishing giant until they were bought out in 1955 by one company. And they were bought by another company, the Condé Nast company. Condé Nast is a huge publishing company, and they are the ones who own the Street and Smith catalog, and Street and Smith owns the Shadow. So, but yeah, the Shadow premiered in 1930. And that's 9 years before Batman. And there's even room for that the Crimson Avenger preceded Batman by months. Therefore, the Crimson Avenger, is the first, costumed, super, detective, or it was the costume. The Crimson Avenger actually must have preceded Superman, but the archetypical dark, what we would even refer to as there's parts of anti-hero involved in the Shadow. But yeah, that's a quick thing of the Shadow. I mean, that's usually the span of my usual videos for the 365. But DC Comics eventually got the Shadow as a licensed property. They bought the licensee, so Condé Nast bought Street and Smith, and by August of 1964, through August of 1964 to September 65, Archie Comics did 8 issues of the Shadow. They got the license to write, produce, and try to make some money off of these, Shadow magazines, and it went 8 issues. So the property lied fallow for a decade or so, almost a decade. In 1973, DC Comics made their first of 4 Shadow comics. They acquired the Shadow license from Condé Nast, from Street and Smith. The license has then passed from DC Comics to Dark Horse in the early 1990s to mid-1990s, and then to Dynamite Comics in 2012. I don't know who currently has the Shadow rights. I don't know. That's a good question. I'll look that up. RTFM. But okay. So let's get back to the point about the Shadow. Only the Shadow knows. I got this Orson Welles radio play. I've got like 12 episodes of the Shadow on. Let's see. Can you see that? Can we see that there? Is it killing it? Here we go. And this was narrated by Orson Welles. This is some really good, going into the past there. This is my iPod. I still have an iPod. iPods are great. And those were the old radio plays. And those are just the ones read by Orson Welles. There are so many more. Radio plays were this is before television. Television was popularized in about the end of the Golden Age. So the beginning of the Silver Age, 1955, 1956, the end of the Golden Age, that really kind of corresponds with the advent of television. Something to think about there. But the Shadow. So DC Comics had their first go with the Shadow in the early 70s. They had, then in the mid 80s, they had the Shadow, Blood and Judgment, written and drawn by Howard Chaykin. Howard Chaykin was a rising star at the time. Howard Chaykin is an amazing comic book artist and writer as well. I remember I would define Chaykin as an American who's trying to be Milo Manara. Milo Manara is known for his very fine lines and beautiful women and risque erotica of the 70s and the early 80s, like Butterscotch, Click, just and The Invisible Man, just to name a few. It's just it's mind-blowing. Yeah, I mean, going into a comic book store and like sneaking into the adult section, there were always adult comics. And Howard Chaykin had also Black Kiss, which was always about just some pulpy detective agency, and then involving a beautiful trans woman, and lacy lingerie. And yeah, I mean, there were trans representation going, for a very long time, and that's throwing that out there. But the Shadow, so the DC got the Shadow, and in the mid '80s, tried again with the Shadow in the mid '80s, and I'm coming to one of my favorite all-time comic book lines, and it was around that time, was 7th, 8th, 9th grade or so, okay? And the Shadow re-releases with what we call on Baxter paper, with a higher cover price, and with mature readers on the header as well. Shadow number 1 came out August '87, so that probably hit the newsstands probably about May '87, with a $1.50 cover price, and that was pretty expensive for the day. It's an '87. Comics were, I think, in the 75-cent range or so, and it was just meant to be a bit more like artistic of its day. So Howard Chaykin is known for dark tales. So they were going to a certain place of Shadow in the Chaykin run, and which they did. What they did was bring the Shadow into the now, which would have been the mid '80s, and they continued that premise with Andy Helfer's run. Andy Helfer was this is a specific Shadow 1 through 19 and the 2 annuals, and this is from August '87 to January 1989. It stops at issue 19 with no resolution to the story. It's one of those where just end publication got canceled. That's it. Boom. And it's done. What happened was, just to let you know that, yeah, I'm futzing around with a stack of comic books. Yeah. A stack of comic books. Shadow comic books. I got these for, I would say $50. Well, I went for $40. I won the eBay thing. Auction for $40. I got issues 1 through 19 of the Shadow, 87, 89, and the 2 annuals, and then they threw in issues 2, 3, and 4 of the Shadow, Blood and Judgment. Now I need to go up there and hustle down issue 1 of Howard Chaykin's The Shadow. I'll have to. Let's just find it, and then yeah, so I was I got the Shadow, Helfer, and Sienkiewicz. Bill Sienkiewicz does the covers and the internal art. So we're going to crack these open in just a second too. But It's not just Bill. It's not just Bill Sienkiewicz. Kyle Baker comes on and finishes this run with this amazing story called "The Seven Deadly Fins," and it's about the Shadow and his cohorts versus an Irish mob. And the Seven Deadly Fins, yeah, it brings it's like an 80s sitcom meets a terrible 1930s detective pulp, starring the Shadow. And yeah, the Shadow has a cast of characters. I follow him around. Look at this ad. Classic rock. Well, turn it up, man. And that's where, literally, that's the same ad. It's free. No, that's Freedom Rock. I went to summer camp. The last time I went to summer camp, I was 15 years old. It was a perfect summer. It was one of those 80s movie summers because it was literally 1988. I unfortunately, in November of 87, I had witnessed some gun violence. I witnessed a woman and her infant get gunned down in the middle of a street. And so, and also to give my mom my single working mom some freedom. And I was, got sent to summer camp every year from being a kid. And every year I got older, it would usually extend the visit by a week. So I went to this amazing summer camp in the summer of 1988. I was 15 years old, and it's called Chop Point, and it's in Bath, Maine. They're still operational, and if you can afford it, it's pretty pricey. You can send your child to Chop Point for a whole summer that will change their lives with meaning and connection and friendship and safe space. Yeah. Good food. Wow, we ate so well. It was really pricey. You can go for one session or two sessions, and back then I went for one session, and that was for 1 month. But I was 15 though. I was old enough. It was really fun. So 1 whole month away from home. I did the previous summer at Camp Winnipeg in Ashburnham, Massachusetts. I did the 3 summers before there, and we did 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. So I had done 3 summers at Camp Winnipeg. That was like 14, 13, and 12. And before that, it was just basically like day camp. But Camp Winnipeg was my first sleepover camp. Yeah, I was about 12 years old or so, 11 or 12. And so yeah, it was nice, and I was in this cabin called Little John. And I made 2 really good friends. There was Muggs and Donnie. And Muggs was from New Jersey. Donnie was from Connecticut. And Donnie and Muggs knew each other from previous sessions. They had been there for the previous month. They go for 2 sessions, and they were there the year before. And and here I am, the mid-season replacement, the cool kid coming in. And I was 15, and they were all 14. And then there was a younger kid's bunkhouse. Then there was like the older kid's bunkhouse. And I think the cutoff point was about 16 or 17. And it was a Christian camp too. It still is. We had Bible study and services on Sundays. And my mom was always about, always had to be a Bible camp because it's just that's our culture. I mean, and but Muggs brought with him his comic books. Lots of Batman comic books and lots of Shadow comic books. Kid had a real big affinity towards 1940s radio plays. Turned me onto it. And Donnie was a huge Star Trek fan. He brought all the Star Trek novels of the time and cassettes, audiobooks. Read by, like, say, George Takei reads this book, and William Shatner reads this book. And those were all fun, too. But Muggs had brought a shitload of comic books. What he brought was this, The Seven Deadly Fins, which blew my mind. And it introduced me to Kyle Baker, whose art is just an amazing experience. And to this violent world of risque comics. And it was, who and what is the weird? I was reading JLA at this time as well. I mean, I wasn't buying The Shadow. When I came home from summer camp, though, I went down and hustled down all the issues of Seven Deadly Fins, and I became a monthly buyer. So I was a monthly buyer at issue 19. I bought this. I've had this before. That it just stops. And there's no resolution. But that's the way comics are sometimes, huh? And but that was my case. So there was the summer camp reading it, 88. Came home, hustled down the copies I didn't have, and I don't think I had all of these either. And yeah, and then eventually over time, I parted ways with those. I don't know how and when. Maybe I gave it to a cousin, and when I was moving out. But then later on in life, in my early 30s, when I had a second renaissance in comic books, I had got another copy of Seven Deadly Fins because I needed it. All right, I didn't have it. I didn't have it anymore, and I needed it. Wow, look at this. V for Vendetta. Fascist Britain, 1997. Wow. Completing the original series from 1982 in deluxe format in full process color starting in May. Suggested for mature readers. Yeah, that's just a bootleg we did. I love the ads on this. But yeah, so I got my second copy of Seven Deadly Fins, and I moved away and got left behind. So this is my third lifetime copy of this Shadow run. I mean, this is what happens with comic book fans over time. Sometimes we lose parts of our collection, then we regain them, and they come back again too. I mean, there's a fluidity to our collections and accumulations, and I just love it that once again this is back in my life, and I'm gonna read them all, and just this incredible Sienkiewicz art, man. I mean, Bill Sienkiewicz is just an amazing artist, and then coming back to Kyle Baker, and Kyle Baker is just these uses of pastels and just they're so artistic. And then it's so very 80s as well. I mean, it's like it's something to experience, and especially if you're of that age. These comic books, these publications, these magazines are doorways to the past, especially with I am not a name, I am not a number, I am a human being. That's not how it goes, but you know what I mean? These are very much windows into the past, especially like it's with the advertisements. V for Vendetta. I remember when Killing Joke was. I bought Killing Joke off the stand when it was new. Yeah, I think I had 2 copies of that. Does it say it's Elseworlds? It just says prestige format. Shipping in March. The definitive Joker story. A cold, hard look into the terror and violence of insanity. Yeah, it does not say it's Elseworlds, but it just says prestige format. Yeah, so these are great comic books, and let's just bust one open real quick to show you about my love of this story, the Seven Deadly Fins. And so, yeah, and just a couple of years later, the Batman '89 movie will come out. Remember, this is all Warner Brothers stuff, too, DC Comics. It was just something about this story that just got me. The faces. Just this art, this Kyle Baker art was just so profound to me. It was just so expressive. These backgrounds, I mean, like, I don't know if he like those are what we would call light box these days. You know, just light box means like you take a picture and you trace over a lot of different things, and then there's also some kind of like really, you know, French thing going on here too. Just the love, the uses of shadows and colors in this. This makes fun of the of the gumshoe narration and the private detective. Yeah, and this artist. It was colored by Tom Zucco, lettered by Bob Lappin, edited by Mike Carlin. But Andy Helfer wrote this, and a healthy dose of perverse enthusiasm by brand new artist Kyle Baker. That means he drew it and inked it. And they get a higher page rate for that too. I just love just the colors in this. And it plays with the shadow mythology. Like, is he magic? Is it the whole magic is distraction? Well, this just throws it all on its ear, and yeah, I gotta say that this is my third copy of this comic in my life. Yeah, and that's part of being a comics fan. You know, in 1994, 5 years after this, 6 years after this stopped, this came out. Alec Baldwin. There's a good cast in this. Ian McKellen. Penelope Ann Miller is just so beautiful. Oh gosh, Alec Baldwin's pretty good in this too. Peter Boyle and Jonathan Winters. He's a comedic actor of yesteryear, and he had a huge impact on Robin Williams, and Tim Curry. There's a lot of people in this movie, and it's not as bad as as it seems. It's just very it's very earnest, and it's not terrible. I mean, only a couple years before this came out, Dick Tracy. Batman came out in '89. That means Batman Returns is '92, and Batman Forever came out in '95. Yeah, and so there was this huge. We've always been in some kind of superhero movie binge since the movie frame since the late '80s. I think since Warner Brothers bought DC Comics. And that was also right shortly before the time Marvel Comics was gonna go bankrupt in just a few more years. But they survived. But yeah, so this is the Shadow, the story of Kent Allard. He was a pilot in World War I, and he found he became an expat, and he learned some mystical powers, or the power, the way of the shaman, or the priest, about distraction and about making something look magic when in fact it's a sleight of hand. And and it's part of the golden age of comics. So yeah, the Shadow predates Batman, predates Superman. Most definitely, probably the first superhero. The way we perceive superheroes. There's also, I hear this predates someone called Spring-Heeled Jack, something from England. It was a folklore of English, the Victorian era. In 1837 was the first claimed sighting of Spring-Heeled Jack. And he had springs on his heel, and he stopped crime or something. And go look him up. He's one of the first, reported superheroes of like how we would define a superhero. Like a devil-like aspect. With the other said he was tall and thin with the appearance of a gentleman. Yeah, Spring-Heeled Jack. Yeah, look it up. And that's wasn't fiction, or maybe it was fiction, but it wasn't about stories or serials. It was just a visiting. Oh wow! It just sounds like this person was Spring Heel Jack wasn't a superhero. Sounds like that they were what we would call a so invulnerable or tortured or yikes. Maybe don't look that up. But look up The Shadow. Yeah, I mean the Shadow is a. I'm really psyched that they threw in these 3 issues of the Chaykin run. I love Howard Chaykin's art. I would sneak looks at Chaykin's art because it was erotica and it was dirty and it was forbidden. I was way too young to be looking at that stuff. And yeah, I mean, The Shadow. So yeah, that's a deep dive into the golden age of comic books. But these aren't golden age comic books. These are late 80s comics that I grew up on. And this is about reunification. I've been reunited with an old friend once again. This is the 3rd copy of these comic books I've ever had. But that's how comic book collections go. You look at your long boxes and your shelves and your spinner rack, and you're like, where did my copy of Punisher War Journal number 5 go? Where's my remote control? You know, we ask the serious questions here in our fandom fellowships. And well, thank you so much for tuning in. Give me a thumbs up if you like this kind of content. Give me a thumbs down if you didn't. Leave a comment in the comments section about The Shadow, about dudes in tank tops. Talking about geeky stuff and winking at you. And give me, I would love to earn your subscription too. I'm an ordained minister. I make spiritual content. I say, let's get spiritual. We often do. I'm an ordained minister. I just said that. And I'm a professional chef. And I give you restaurant quality hacks so you can make nutritious, delicious, and beautiful food in your home for your family at your table. So come on by and subscribe to Reverend Sully Station. Thank you so much for tuning in today. And yeah, it's just I'm really blessed, and I was lucky, and I got it for a really good price too, about $50 or just above $50 with shipping, and I ended up getting 24 single issues out of that. And let's just do the math real quick for us mouth breathers. You know what I mean? So that was, say, $53. And we're going to divide that by 24 issues. So that came into about $2.21 per issue. And with a cover price here of $1.50 and $1.75, and there are 2 annuals in here, and those are $2.50 a piece. So yeah, I mean, that kind of balances out. I kind of like got them almost cover price-ish, huh? That ain't that cool, huh? That's part about being in the game too. If you're a comics collector, I mean, you are attracted to spend your money on things such as these artifacts, these brittle, fragile artifacts. I mean, there's so many things that can happen to this: fire, water, sunlight, mishandling a child. I mean, I'm being serious. I mean, or there's this great scene in Mallrats where it's like, usual fault rules apply. I try to teach you how to handle comic books in grade school. You wanted to play Little League. I still love Kevin Smith. I don't care. But thank you so much for tuning in. You have a great day. And remember, who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? The Shadow knows. Yeah, so thank you so much. A little supplemental for my 365 Golden Age series, and but it's not quite Golden Age. It's the property's still going on, and Dynamite Comics has it or had it. Let's see who does The Shadow next. If we'll still be entertained. Thank you so very much. Cheers.